Franz Kafka is someone you don't fully understand until you return to him later in life. I reread his books recently, and for the first time they didn't feel like stories. They felt like diagnoses, not of society, but of the human condition itself. Kafka wasn't trying to entertain anyone. He wasn't building worlds to escape into. He was holding up a mirror, one that shows you the parts of yourself you usually avoid. His writing is unsettling because it feels too familiar. The anxiety, the confusion, the guilt you can't explain, the fear of disappointing people you love, the quiet pressure of existing. Kafka captures all of it with painful accuracy, and he does it without offering comfort. He doesn't tell you that everything will be okay. Instead, he shows you why things feel the way they do. He reveals the machinery underneath your emotions. Kafka was never a philosopher in the academic sense, but he understood people more deeply than most philosophers ever did. He understood that suffering isn't always dramatic. Most suffering is silent, invisible, internal. It's not the kind you can point at. It's the kind that shapes you from the inside. His characters struggle with forces they can't see or explain, just like real people do. They're crushed by guilt without knowing the crime, trapped by expectations without knowing who set the rules, reshaped into versions of themselves they never chose. That's why his books stay with you long after you close them. They whisper things you don't want to hear but know are true. Kafka's stories are warnings. They show what happens when you lose yourself to the world, when you let guilt define you, when you become invisible in your own life. They're also revelations, small flashes of clarity hidden inside chaos. And above all, they're mirrors. Every bizarre, unsettling event in his novels reflects some real psychological struggle that people still face today. You don't read Kafka to escape life. You read him to understand why life feels the way it does. That's why his writing hits harder the older you get. You start to recognize yourself in the confusion, in the shame, in the constant feeling of being judged by some unseen authority. Kafka wrote the truth that most people run from. He didn't sugarcoat anything. He didn't pretend that life is neat or understandable. He confronted the messy, painful, unfinished parts of being human. And once you see those truths, you can't unsee them. His books force you to sit with the uncomfortable reality that meaning is fragile, identity is unstable, and suffering is often the price of being alive. That's why we're going through Kafka's work, because hidden inside the darkness of his stories are lessons about who we are, why we suffer, and how to find ourselves again. Each of his 5 major works holds a different piece of that puzzle. Their stories aren't just tragic, they are maps of the inner world, written by someone who walked through its darkest corridors and returned with what he saw. Gregor Samsa's story begins with one of the most disturbing and memorable openings in literature. A man wakes up and discovers he has transformed into a giant insect. Kafka doesn't explain how or why this happened because the cause isn't the point. The transformation is a metaphor for something far more real. Those moments in life when you suddenly realize you've become someone you never meant to be. It's the feeling of waking up one day and seeing that you no longer recognize the person in the mirror. Maybe life's pressure shaped you, maybe responsibility crushed you, maybe exhaustion hollowed you out, or maybe you simply stayed silent for too long while the world shaped you into a version of yourself that never felt right. Gregor's transformation isn't about monstrosity. It's about identity lost through constant sacrifice, constant duty, constant pleasing. It's the moment when your soul can no longer hold the weight you've forced onto it. Before his transformation, Gregor was the provider, the responsible son, the one who carried the entire family financially. Everything he did was for them. He worked a job he hated. He woke up early every morning. He broke his body and spirit just to make sure his parents and sister didn't suffer. But the moment he becomes useless, everything changes. His family doesn't ask how he feels. They don't wonder what broke him, they only see what he can no longer do for them. And that's the painful truth Kafka reveals. If your value is based only on what you provide, then the day you can no longer provide, you become disposable. Gregor's family doesn't see a son or a brother anymore. They see an insect, a burden, a reminder of responsibilities they don't want to face. Gregor tries desperately to cling to his humanity, even as he loses everything familiar about himself. He tries to get out of bed to go to work. He tries to speak to reassure his family. He tries to keep being the person he was, but none of it works. His voice becomes unintelligible. His movements are clumsy and frightening. The more he tries to act like himself, the more the world treats him as a monster. It's a cruel illustration of what happens when you outgrow the identity people expect from you. You can try to explain yourself, try to show them you're still you, but they refuse to see it. Kafka captures this feeling perfectly through Gregor's heartbreaking line. I cannot make you understand. I cannot make anyone understand what is happening inside me. It's one of the most relatable sentences ever written. Everyone has moments where the inner struggle cannot be expressed, where the people around you simply cannot or will not understand what's happening inside your mind. And then comes one of the most beautiful, tragic scenes in the story. Gregor hears his sister playing the violin. Even in his monstrous form, something inside him responds to the music, something human, something alive, something untouched by his exterior transformation. Kafka writes, was he an animal that music could move him so? This moment is crucial. It shows that even when the world sees you as worthless, broken, or unrecognizable, you still have a soul. You still have the capacity for beauty, desire, emotion. Gregor's body is gone, but his inner world, his sensitivity, his longing remains intact. And that's the tragedy of the story. The world no longer cares about who Gregor is on the inside. They only see what he can or cannot do. As the story progresses, his family's disappointment turns into resentment. Their resentment hardens into disgust. Their disgust evolves into the desire to get rid of him completely. They lock him away, ignore him, and talk openly about how their lives would be easier if he weren't there. The same family that once depended entirely on him now wishes he would disappear. Eventually, Gregor dies alone, and his family immediately feels relieved. They go on a trip the next day, talking about their bright future now that he's gone. Kafka forces us to confront a painful truth. Love that depends on usefulness is not love at all, it's convenience. Gregor's story is not just a horror tale, it's a psychological portrait of what happens when your identity becomes tied to your role, your function, or your productivity. Many people feel like Gregor, trapped in a job they hate, carrying the weight of others' needs, slowly losing themselves, silently transforming under the pressure of expectations. And when burnout hits, when you collapse, when you can no longer meet those expectations, you often discover who truly cares for you and who only cared for what you gave them. Pain, as Kafka shows, doesn't just reveal your limits, it reveals people's true loyalty. The metamorphosis also represents the painful process of becoming a new version of yourself, one that people may not accept or understand. When you change your priorities, set boundaries, step away from old patterns, or pursue a new path, some people will treat it as a betrayal. They only loved the version of you that served them, the version that made their life easier. Once you stop fitting into their expectations, you become a burden, selfish, or different. Transformation, even positive transformation, threatens the people who benefited from your old identity. And that is why, in life, your evolution will offend those who only loved the unhealed, overworked, self-sacrificing version of you. Gregor's metamorphosis is a story about what happens when the world no longer sees your humanity. But beneath the horror, Kafka leaves us with a deeper lesson. Your worth cannot depend on the roles you play, because roles can be taken. Bodies can change, circumstances can shift, and when they do, you need something deeper than usefulness. your inner world, your values, your truth, your soul. Gregor never loses his humanity. The tragedy is that everyone else does. They stop seeing him as a person, and in doing so, they reveal the limits of their love. Kafka asks a painful but necessary question. What happens when you become someone you never chose to be? The answer is not simple, but Gregor's story offers clarity. You must confront the parts of your life that are turning you into someone unrecognizable. You must identify the expectations that suffocate you. You must understand that your value is not determined by how much you produce. And most importantly, you must be willing to walk away from the people who only appreciate you when you are convenient. The metamorphosis forces us to face the hard truth that change, especially uncomfortable change, is inevitable. Sometimes it is forced on you. Sometimes it comes from exhaustion, sometimes from self-sacrifice, and sometimes from the quiet realization that you cannot continue living the way you have been. But even when the world doesn't understand that change, even when it reacts with rejection or disappointment, you must hold on to the part of you that still responds to beauty, to meaning, to music, the part of you that proves you are still human, no matter how much life has distorted your outer form. Gregor's tragedy is that he dies believing he is worthless. But your story doesn't have to end that way. His transformation destroyed him because he had no boundaries, no support, and no sense of worth beyond his usefulness. Your transformation, however, can be your liberation, if you choose to see it as the beginning of becoming the person you were always meant to be, not the version others demanded from you. Kafka's The Trial opens with one of the most unsettling premises in all of literature. Joseph K., an ordinary bank employee, wakes up to find two men in his room telling him he's under arrest. There's no explanation, no accusation, no paperwork, nothing. His life hasn't changed, he hasn't committed a crime, he hasn't harmed anyone, yet suddenly, he's pulled into a system that seems to operate by rules no one explains. This is the first horror of Kafka's world, being judged without knowing why. Joseph K. is thrown into a trial he never asked for, fighting charges that were never made clear, in a court that hides its own logic from him. Every attempt to understand what's happening only pulls him deeper into confusion. And as the story progresses, Joseph K. slowly breaks under the weight of guilt he cannot define, shame he cannot escape, and expectations he cannot meet. What makes the trial so powerful is how familiar it feels. You don't need to be arrested to understand Joseph K. You only need to have lived with anxiety, self-doubt, or the feeling that you're constantly failing at something invisible. Joseph K. becomes a symbol of the modern person who wakes up one day and realizes that they're trying to prove themselves to a world that hasn't even told them the rules. His life turns into a desperate attempt to justify himself, to authorities, to others, and eventually to his own mind. He keeps asking, what did I do? How did I get here? What am I supposed to fix? But no answer ever comes, and that's the point. Kafka exposes the way we punish ourselves for crimes that don't exist, mistakes we never made, and standards we never agreed to. Throughout the story, Joseph K. runs into officials who act like everything is perfectly normal, like the trial is deserved, like the process is just. But when he tries to get answers, he gets nothing but circular logic, meaningless procedures, and endless bureaucracy. It's the kind of system that crushes you not through violence, but through confusion. Kafka shows the psychological damage of environments where the rules shift constantly, where nothing makes sense, but you're still expected to play along. And in the middle of this absurdity, Joseph K. begins to internalize the guilt. He starts to assume he must have done something wrong. Otherwise, why would this be happening? This is the trap of the invisible trial. When the world treats you like you're guilty, eventually you start to believe it. There's a moment in the book where someone tells Joseph K. it's only because of their stupidity that they're able to be so sure of themselves. This line cuts deep. It reveals why some people walk through life with confidence while others crumble under doubt. The people who never question themselves appear certain not because they are right, but because they lack the capacity to see their own flaws. Doubt, ironically, is a sign of intelligence, but it can also become a prison. If every decision is questioned, if every action is judged by your own inner critic, if every mistake feels like a personal failing, then life becomes an endless trial. And unlike Joseph K., you don't need guards or courtrooms. Your mind becomes the courtroom. Kafka wrote The Trial in the early 1900s, but he predicted the mental world we live in today. He predicted anxiety before the word became mainstream. He predicted imposter syndrome long before psychologists began writing papers about it. He predicted the fear of being judged, the terror of being found out, the constant pressure of trying to live up to expectations that are never clearly defined. Joseph K.'s trial is not about law or crime. It's about the emotional weight of existing in a world where you never feel like enough. The constant sense that you should be doing more, becoming more, proving more. That vague tension in your chest, that fear of disappointing people, that belief that you're somehow behind in life. Kafka captured all of that 100 years ago. And then there's the second quote. Logic may indeed be unshakable, but it cannot withstand a man who wants to live. This line reveals a core message hidden inside the chaos. Even when life feels unfair, illogical, or unforgiving, the simple desire to live, to keep going, to fight, to seek meaning, can break through confusion. Joseph K.'s tragedy is not that he is arrested or accused, it's that he never chooses life. He lets the system define him. He lets shame swallow him. He accepts the judgment, even without proof. And that's the ultimate punishment, to stop fighting for yourself. Kafka forces us to confront a painful truth. Most of your suffering is not from what you've done, it's from what you believe you are. The invisible trial in your own head is far more terrifying than any external judgment. You create accusations out of insecurity. You sentence yourself for imperfections. You punish yourself for being human. You live in fear of disappointing others, fear of failing your own expectations, fear of not being enough. You carry guilt without cause, shame without crime, doubt without evidence. You are both the accused and the judge. Joseph K.'s story is a warning about the danger of living without self-trust. When you don't trust yourself, the world becomes a court, and every person becomes a potential judge. Every mistake becomes evidence. Every silence becomes suspicion. Every flaw becomes a sentence. That's why the final scene of the trial is so devastating. Joseph K. is executed like a dog, not because he was guilty, not because he committed a crime, but because he stopped resisting the narrative that was forced upon him. He surrendered to a judgment that was never real. Kafka shows that the greatest tragedy is not external punishment, it's internal surrender. In modern life, this invisible trial takes many forms. It's the feeling of being judged on social media. It's the constant comparison to others. It's the fear of falling behind. It's the pressure to be successful, attractive, productive, perfect. It's the quiet voice that says you're not doing enough, not achieving enough, not becoming enough. It's the sense that other people know what they're doing while you're still trying to make sense of life. Everyone else seems confident, certain, stable. Meanwhile, you feel like you're improvising your way through existence. Kafka saw this long before it became a cultural epidemic. The power of the trial lies in the recognition that the world's judgment is often random, inconsistent, and undeserved, yet we internalize it as if it defines us. Kafka is telling you, stop accepting guilt that isn't yours. Stop participating in trials you didn't choose. Stop letting the world convince you that you're less than you are. Joseph K. never questions whether he even deserves to be judged. He just assumes he must have earned it somehow. But the real crime is never questioning the legitimacy of the judgment itself. There is another lesson hidden in the story. The system that judges you doesn't actually care about you. Whether it's society, culture, strangers, or even family, most judgments are driven by expectation, not truth. You cannot live your life trying to satisfy a faceless, shifting standard. The moment you let external voices determine your worth, you become trapped in an unending trial. And there's no verdict that will ever set you free because the system isn't designed to end. It's designed to exhaust you. Kafka forces you to confront a hard but liberating realization. The trial ends when you stop participating in it, when you decide that your worth cannot be debated, when you stop trying to justify yourself, when you refuse to apologize for existing, when you stop living as if someone is always watching, always judging, always waiting for you to fail. Joseph K.'s death is tragic because it's symbolic of what happens when you let guilt define your identity. He dies not because he was guilty, but because he accepted guilt as truth. Like a dog is Kafka's final brutal reminder. When you allow shame to replace self-worth, you lose the ability to stand up straight. You lose the dignity that comes from knowing yourself. You lose the right to your own life. But your story doesn't have to follow Joseph K.'s path. You can step out of the invisible courtroom. You can stop asking permission to be who you are. You can stop carrying guilt that was never yours. You can stop believing that there's some secret standard you must meet to deserve happiness. The world may judge you, misunderstand you, or expect things from you, but none of that defines you unless you accept it. Kafka is showing you that freedom doesn't come from winning the trial. It comes from realizing the trial was an illusion all along. The Castle is a story that feels like a dream you can't wake up from. One where every road leads somewhere new, yet you never get any closer to where you want to be. The entire book follows a man known only as K, who arrives in a snowy village with a single mission: to reach the castle. The castle sits on a hill, looming above everything, representing authority, meaning, purpose, validation, everything people spend their lives chasing. But from the moment K begins his journey, he discovers that nothing about the castle is straightforward. Every time he tries to make progress, new barriers appear. Officials give contradictory instructions, messages arrive too late, permissions are denied without explanation. People claim to help him but only confuse him more. And no matter how close he thinks he's getting, the castle always seems to recede, as if the world itself is conspiring to keep him outside. The genius of Kafka's storytelling is that he never shows us the inside of the castle. We don't know who runs it, what its purpose is, or whether it even functions properly. All we know is that K believes reaching it will give his life meaning. That belief is enough to keep him going through cold nights, rejections, bureaucratic nightmares, and dead ends. But the closer he looks, the more he realizes that the castle is not a place. It's a system of illusions, promises, and shifting rules. And this is where the story begins to reflect our own lives. The castle becomes a mirror for every dream we chase that feels just out of reach, career goals that never seem achievable, social approval that never fully arrives, success that always seems one step ahead. Kafka turns the idea of purpose into something slippery, something that keeps moving every time you get near it. K's struggle is painfully familiar because modern life is full of castles. These are the goals that society teaches us to chase but never truly defines. We're told to be successful, but what does success mean? We're told to be someone important, but what does importance even look like? We're told to achieve, to fit in, to rise, to make something of ourselves, but the instructions are vague, contradictory, and constantly changing. Just like K, many people spend their lives trying to meet expectations that are impossible to understand, let alone fulfill. The castle represents that unreachable ideal, the job that will finally make you feel complete, the relationship that will make you whole, the validation that will end your doubt, the accomplishment that will remove your anxiety. But each time you get close to one of these goals, the target shifts. Kafka understood that the human search for meaning is often sabotaged by the structures built to define it. One of the most striking lines in The Castle is, "It is only because of their illusions that men ever love." In the context of the story, it means that people cling to illusions because those illusions give their lives shape. Without the illusion of meaning, purpose, or progress, life can feel empty. The villagers worship the castle, not because it actually does anything for them, but because believing in its importance gives them a sense of order. Similarly, we hold on to the illusion that success will fix everything, that reaching some external milestone will give us the peace we lack inside. We keep walking toward our own castles, convinced that once we enter the door, everything will finally make sense. Kafka reveals the painful truth. Sometimes we love our goals not for what they are, but for what we hope they will make us feel. We project our longings onto them. Another line that pierces the heart of the story is, "You are free, that is why you are lost." Freedom sounds like a good thing, but for many people, freedom is overwhelming. When you can choose who to be, where to go, what to pursue, and what purpose to devote your life to, the weight of those choices can be paralyzing. K is not trapped in the village. He can walk anywhere. He can choose a different path. He can give up the castle entirely, but he doesn't. And that's the paradox Kafka exposes. Freedom without direction is confusion. When the world gives you endless possibilities but no clear sense of meaning, you end up feeling lost, even though the road is open. Modern people feel this every day. You can switch jobs, move countries, change identities, reinvent yourself endlessly, but without an internal compass, the freedom becomes overwhelming. You end up wandering without ever arriving. As the castle unfolds, it becomes clear that K's frustration isn't just about external obstacles. The real conflict comes from his need for validation. He wants the castle to approve of him, to acknowledge him, to give him a role. He believes that belonging to the castle, being accepted by its officials, will finally give him the identity he lacks. This is the same struggle many people face today, trying to find their place in a world that doesn't clearly define where they belong, looking for permission, looking for recognition, looking for someone or something to say, "You matter." But Kafka shows how dangerous this longing can be. When you seek validation from systems that are chaotic, indifferent, or impersonal, you set yourself up for a lifetime of disappointment. Like K, you keep trying, hoping for a breakthrough, but all you get are new forms of confusion. The castle's endless bureaucracy is not just a plot device. It's a metaphor for societal expectations. Society tells you to work hard, but never tells you when you've worked enough. It tells you to succeed, but never defines success clearly. It tells you to be someone, but never explains what that someone should look like. Kafka understood that the systems we live within are built to keep us striving, not arriving. They keep us busy chasing goals that move further away, so we never stop to question the chase itself. The castle is not unreachable because K is unworthy. It is unreachable because it is designed that way. Its purpose is to make you chase, not to let you arrive. And this is why the story feels so real. The feeling of chasing something that always slips through your fingers is one of the most universal human experiences. But Kafka's message isn't hopeless. Hidden inside the frustration of the story is a profound truth. Purpose is not something you find at the top of a hill. It's something you create in the act of climbing. Kafka suggests that meaning doesn't come from reaching the castle or achieving some grand result. Meaning comes from the effort itself, from the choices you make, from the values you uphold, from the person you become while trying to reach your goals. The castle may be unreachable, but the journey toward it shapes K's character. And the same is true in life. Every struggle refines you. Every setback teaches you. Every confusing path forces you to clarify who you are and what you stand for. Kafka wants you to understand that waiting for external validation will keep you trapped forever. The castle won't save you. It won't define you. It won't give your life meaning. And even if you were to reach it, it wouldn't give you the satisfaction you imagine. Purpose is not something handed to you. It's something you build internally. It grows through effort, not arrival, through persistence, not permission, through the struggle, not the destination. K's journey shows that the search for purpose is frustrating precisely because it's not supposed to follow a straight line. Life is messy, confusing, full of false paths and shifting rules. But that doesn't mean the journey is meaningless. Kafka's brilliance lies in showing that confusion itself can be a teacher, that longing can be a guide, that pursuing something greater than yourself, even when it feels impossible, can shape you in ways that comfort never could. In the end, the castle isn't a story about failure. It's a story about the courage to strive in a world that offers no guarantees. It's a story about refusing to let confusion stop you. It's about creating your own path even when the official path is blocked. It's about realizing that meaning is not found in institutions, systems, or external approval. Meaning emerges from your daily actions, your persistence, your resilience, and your willingness to keep going even when the road is unclear. Kafka teaches you that you might never reach your castle. You might never get the validation you crave, the clarity you want, or the certainty you dream of. But none of that diminishes the value of your effort. None of that makes your struggle worthless. None of that takes away from the person you become in the process. Purpose isn't at the top of the hill. It's in the climb. It's in the attempt. It's in the very act of moving forward. The world may keep you outside, but that doesn't mean you don't belong. The world may confuse you, but that doesn't mean your path isn't real. The world may set obstacles in your way, but every step you take is still progress. Kafka is telling you that life's meaning isn't hidden in unreachable castles. It's hidden in the courage to keep walking toward them anyway. Kafka's In the Penal Colony is one of his darkest stories, not because of the violence itself, but because of the horrifying logic behind the violence. The story takes place in a remote island colony where justice is carried out by a machine designed to torture prisoners to death. The machine doesn't simply execute them, it engraves the crime they supposedly committed into their skin, carving the words deeper and deeper until the body can't survive anymore. The most disturbing part is that the condemned man never learns what he's accused of. He isn't given a trial, a chance to defend himself, or even an explanation. He is expected to accept the punishment blindly, as if guilt is automatic and unquestionable. Kafka uses this bizarre, nightmarish scenario to explore something far more familiar: the way systems, whether societal, institutional, or psychological, can destroy people without ever teaching them anything. The condemned prisoner learns nothing from his sentence because he doesn't even know why he's being punished, and the officer, the man who oversees the machine, believes so deeply in its justice that he never questions its cruelty. He worships the system, trusts it completely, and insists that the punishment is meaningful even though it clearly serves no purpose except destruction. This blind obedience becomes his downfall. When he realizes that the traveler refuses to endorse the machine, he sacrifices himself to it, convinced that dying by the device will prove its greatness. But the machine malfunctions. It kills him quickly, almost instantly, and without carving anything into his skin, stripping even his death of the honor he imagined. Kafka shows that loyalty to a cruel system leads only to senseless suffering. What makes this story so horrifying is not just the violence but the logic behind it. The officer believes that guilt is never to be doubted. That line is a perfect summary of how destructive systems justify themselves. If guilt is automatic, then punishment is always justified. If punishment is justified, then the system is always right. This belief removes all humanity from the process. It removes all responsibility. It removes all moral questioning. And when people adopt this mindset, whether in politics, workplaces, religions, families, or even inside their own minds, they become capable of inflicting tremendous harm without ever seeing themselves as cruel. They see themselves as simply following the rules. Kafka exposes how dangerous this mindset is. It allows cruelty to become routine. It allows suffering to become normalized. It allows people to destroy others and themselves without ever questioning why. The traveler in the story is the only one who sees the situation clearly. He recognizes immediately that the system is barbaric. He sees the condemned man's confusion, the officer's fanaticism, and the senseless brutality of the machine. He sees exactly what Kafka wants us to see. The injustice of the process and the inhumanity of the execution were obvious. But in the penal colony, obvious cruelty is invisible to those who serve the system. They are so trapped inside its logic that they can no longer recognize reality. The officer genuinely believes that torture teaches moral lessons, even though the condemned man never learns the reason for his punishment. This is the insanity Kafka wants us to see. Systems that hurt you while convincing you that suffering is necessary or deserved. In modern life, the penal colony isn't a physical place. It's a metaphor for environments that drain you, control you, or punish you without helping you grow. It's the toxic workplace where you're blamed for things you didn't do, expected to meet impossible demands, or punished for problems no one explains. It's the corporate culture that teaches you to worship productivity even as it grinds you down. It's the job that takes your energy, your confidence, your sense of worth, while pretending that the pressure is normal. In these environments, people often feel guilty without knowing why. They constantly feel like they're one mistake away from being punished, judged, or replaced. Workers become like the condemned man, obeying rules they don't understand, controlled by systems that never reward them. And managers or leaders become like the officer, believing that pressure, fear, or punishment is necessary for discipline or performance, never seeing the destruction they cause. But the penal colony also represents something deeper and more personal, the systems of punishment you create inside your own mind. Many people live with an internal machine that punishes them for mistakes, imperfections, or imagined failures. It carves sentences into their self-esteem every time they mess up. It punishes them with guilt, shame, and self-criticism. And just like in the story, the person doesn't always know what crime they've committed. They only know that they feel guilty, inadequate, or unworthy. They live under the weight of punishment they never deserved. The inner critic becomes the officer, blindly loyal to a brutal standard, punishing you according to rules that no longer make sense. And the more you obey this internal system, the harder it becomes to escape. Kafka is warning you about the danger of punishing yourself for things outside your control. Sometimes you blame yourself for things that were never your fault. Sometimes you hold yourself to impossible standards and then punish yourself when you can't meet them. Sometimes you carry guilt for decisions you needed to make or for circumstances you couldn't change. Kafka exposes how destructive this can be. Mental self-punishment doesn't teach you anything. It doesn't make you better. It doesn't help you grow. It only breaks you down. It becomes a cycle, one where the punishment continues even when the crime was imaginary or trivial. And just like the machine, this internal punishment often malfunctions, hurting you in ways that feel senseless and unfair. Another modern version of the penal colony is found in toxic habits. These are cycles of behavior that punish you without giving anything back. Overworking yourself, staying in relationships that drain you, engaging in addictions that numb you while destroying you slowly, maintaining routines that hurt your mental health. These habits become like machines. They continue operating even when you don't want them to. They create suffering that feels automatic and unavoidable, and often people continue these cycles because, like the officer, they believe the suffering has some purpose. They convince themselves that burnout is necessary for success, that staying in a harmful relationship is a moral duty, that punishing themselves is the price of becoming better. Kafka shows how dangerous this illusion is. Some systems create pain not because it's meaningful, but because they are broken. The officer's self-sacrifice is one of the most tragic parts of the story. He willingly puts his own body into the machine because he believes that suffering validates the system. But the machine breaks. It kills him instantly without engraving anything. His death is meaningless. Kafka is showing you that loyalty to destructive systems, whether external or internal, leads nowhere. You can give everything, sacrifice everything, surrender your well-being, and the system will still fail you. It will still consume you, and it will not reward your devotion. The machine is not built to honor you. It's built to destroy whoever submits to it. This is Kafka's ultimate message. Not all pain is meaningful. This is one of the most important lessons you can learn in life. There is pain that transforms you, struggle that builds resilience, challenge that reveals your strength, suffering that leads to self-awareness. But there is also pain that breaks you for no reason, pain that destroys your spirit, pain that steals your joy, pain that teaches nothing and takes everything. Kafka wants you to learn to tell the difference. The penal colony represents the kind of suffering you must walk away from, the kind that is built into systems that don't care about you, that don't listen to you, that don't want you to grow. Walking away from this kind of pain requires clarity, it requires courage, it requires the willingness to question systems that everyone else accepts as normal. It requires the ability to say enough, even when obedience feels easier. Kafka wants you to recognize when you're living inside a penal colony without realizing it, when you're allowing destructive patterns to dictate your life, when you're obeying rules that harm you, or when you're punishing yourself for things outside your control. The condemned man in the story didn't know why he was suffering, and that is the tragedy. But your suffering doesn't have to be like that. You can choose to seek meaning. You can choose to reject punishment that teaches nothing. You can choose to stop obeying systems, external or internal, that destroy you. Kafka is giving you permission to step out of the cycle. The pain that transforms you is worth enduring, but the pain that imprisons you is not. And the sooner you recognize the difference, the sooner you can begin building a life guided by growth, not guilt. A Hunger Artist is one of his most tragic and quietly devastating stories, not because of dramatic events, but because of how accurately it captures the loneliness of a person who dedicates themselves to something the world no longer understands. The protagonist is a man whose entire identity revolves around a strange form of art. He starves himself as a public performance. For years, crowds gather around his cage, watching him waste away while admiring his discipline, his willpower, his suffering. People are fascinated by him, impressed by the limits he can endure, captivated by the spectacle of a man turning his body into a message. But as time passes, audiences lose interest. His suffering is no longer a marvel. The Hunger Artist continues to push himself, fasting longer and longer, but no one cares anymore. The attention fades, the crowds disappear, and eventually he's forgotten. Left to starve in a circus cage, unnoticed by the people who walk past him. His final confession, whispered with his last breath, reveals the heartbreaking truth behind his life. I always wanted you to admire my fasting. But Kafka doesn't leave it at that. The Hunger Artist explains why he fasted for so long. Because I couldn't find food I liked. These two lines together break something open inside the reader. He wasn't fasting for applause. He wasn't torturing himself for fame. He starved because nothing in life satisfied him. Nothing fed him. Nothing filled the emptiness inside. His art wasn't a performance. It was a reflection of his inner reality. He fasted because he couldn't help it. The world misread his suffering completely, mistaking it for ambition, pride, or obsession, when in reality it came from a deeper hunger that real food could never satisfy. Kafka uses this story to explore one of the most painful experiences a person can go through: giving everything you have to something, only to watch the world ignore it, misunderstand it, or move on from it. The hunger artist devotes his entire existence to perfecting his strange craft. He pushes his limits, sacrifices his body, dedicates every moment of his life to the art of not eating, and yet the world grows bored. The thing he's most proud of is the same thing people eventually mock or dismiss. This is the tragedy of the misunderstood creator, the person whose inner world is so different, so unusual, so intense, that the outer world can't make sense of it. The hunger artist is an outsider not because he wants to be, but because he can't be anything else. His art isolates him, his dedication isolates him, his inability to find satisfaction in ordinary pleasures isolates him. The story captures the experience of anyone who feels different, anyone who lives by a rhythm others can't hear, anyone whose passions or perspectives make them stand out in ways that feel lonely. Kafka is showing that being different carries a cost. Even if you're dedicated, disciplined, committed, even if you give everything to your craft, there's no guarantee the world will recognize your effort or appreciate your uniqueness. Throughout the story, Kafka highlights how people admire the hunger artist not because they understand him, but because they're fascinated by the spectacle of his suffering. He was admired for his fasting, Kafka writes, because he could go on fasting longer than anyone else. People didn't admire his soul, his dedication, or his inner struggle. They admired the endurance of his body, the extremity of his deprivation. In other words, they admired the wrong thing. They admired the surface of his pain, not the reason behind it. This is exactly what happens to many creators, thinkers, or deeply introspective people today. The world often sees the result of their effort, but not the emotional truth that inspired it. People applaud the achievement, but overlook the loneliness, the doubt, the inner hunger that drove the person to create in the first place. And then comes one of the most haunting symbolic moments in Kafka's writing. After the hunger artist dies, the circus replaces him with a panther. The crowd immediately gathers to see the panther, not because it's doing anything impressive, but because it's alive, wild, powerful, energetic. Everything the hunger artist was not. The contrast is brutal. The artist, with all his complexity and suffering, is forgotten, replaced by something that requires no understanding. The panther thrives effortlessly, while the artist starved himself into oblivion. Kafka uses this contrast to expose how easily the world trades depth for spectacle, discipline for instinct, subtlety for loudness. The artist's inner world was too complicated, too painful, too misunderstood. The panther, on the other hand, is simple. It excites people. It demands nothing from them. It is easier to appreciate. Kafka's message is clear. The world does not always value those who give everything. Sometimes it values what entertains, not what reveals truth. Sometimes it appreciates boldness more than vulnerability, instinct more than introspection. But Kafka doesn't present this as a reason to stop creating. Instead, he forces you to confront a difficult but liberating truth. Your purpose will make sense to you long before it makes sense to anyone else. The hunger artist's tragedy is not that the world didn't understand him. His tragedy is that he relied on the world's admiration to validate something that came from a much deeper place. He wanted others to recognize his suffering, but his suffering came from an internal hunger that no one else could feel. The modern world is full of hunger artists, people who work tirelessly on projects, crafts, ideas, and passions that the world may never fully appreciate. Writers who pour their soul into pages that go unread. Musicians who create songs no one hears. Entrepreneurs who build things no one believes in. Thinkers who explore ideas no one else understands. content creators who give everything to their work only to watch it struggle for attention, people who try to express their inner world but feel invisible. Kafka understood this experience intimately because he lived it. During his lifetime, Kafka wasn't celebrated as a genius. He felt misunderstood, unseen, and unappreciated, just like his characters. He wrote as if the world wasn't watching because in truth the world wasn't. Many people today feel exactly like the hunger artist. You give effort, time, passion, and discipline to something meaningful, but people don't respond the way you hoped they would. You feel invisible. You feel ignored. You feel like your work, your identity, doesn't matter. Kafka's story speaks directly to that feeling. He shows that being misunderstood doesn't mean your work is meaningless. It means your work comes from a place others haven't reached yet. Your purpose might be decades ahead of those around you. Your vision might be too personal, too intense, or too authentic for the world to understand immediately, and that is okay. Meaning doesn't disappear just because the audience does. Another powerful idea in this story is that some people are driven by an inner hunger they didn't choose. The hunger artist didn't starve for applause. He starved because nothing in life satisfied him. This is a metaphor for those who feel a deep, persistent longing, people who sense that there is more to life, even if they can't name what it is, people who don't fit comfortably into ordinary routines, people who can't pretend to enjoy things that others find fulfilling. Kafka is telling you that having a hunger for something deeper isn't a defect. It doesn't make you broken or strange. It makes you someone who searches instead of settling, someone who sees beyond surface pleasures, someone who is unwilling to pretend that mediocrity is enough. But Kafka also warns against letting that hunger destroy you. The hunger artist's devotion turns into self-destruction because he never learns to feed himself emotionally. He never learns to separate his purpose from people's admiration. He never learns to seek nourishment outside his art. He never learns to stop. This is a trap many creators fall into. They burn themselves out in pursuit of a level of perfection or authenticity that costs them their well-being. They starve themselves creatively, emotionally, physically, or spiritually because they believe it's necessary for greatness. Kafka is warning you. Dedication is powerful, but obsession can consume you. The final lesson of the story is one of acceptance. The hunger artist didn't find peace because he needed the world to understand him, but understanding rarely comes at the beginning of a creator's journey. It comes later, sometimes much later. Kafka himself never saw the world recognize the power of his writing. He died believing he had failed. Yet today, millions of people read his words and find mirror-like reflections of their deepest emotions. His genius was misunderstood until long after he was gone. This is the message for anyone who feels unseen. Your work may not be recognized today, but that doesn't mean it isn't important. Purpose does not depend on applause. Meaning does not depend on an audience. Kafka, through the hunger artist, is telling you that the real tragedy is not being misunderstood. It's abandoning your calling because others don't understand it yet. Your purpose is yours first. Others understand it later. Sometimes years later, sometimes decades later, sometimes never, but that still does not make it meaningless. The hunger artist's life is a reminder that your truth, your vision, and your identity will make sense to you long before they make sense to anyone else. And that is enough to keep going. Kafka's characters are strange, unsettling, and often trapped in impossible situations. But the truth is that none of them are monsters. They are mirrors. They reflect the parts of ourselves we spend most of our lives trying not to look at. Gregor, Joseph K from the castle, the officer in the penal colony, the hunger artist. Each one carries a piece of the human condition that we usually hide behind busyness, entertainment, or denial. And that's why Kafka's stories, as dark as they seem, are not stories of despair. They are stories of clarity. They force you to stop running from the realities inside you, the guilt you carry for no reason, the longing you can't explain, the pressure to be useful, the fear of being invisible, the hunger for purpose, the exhaustion of trying to belong in a world that keeps shifting its rules. Kafka reveals these emotions not to overwhelm you, but to free you from pretending they don't exist. When you look at his characters closely, you start to see patterns, not just in the stories but in your own life. You will be misunderstood, just like Gregor and the hunger artist. You will feel guilt that doesn't belong to you, just like Joseph K. You will be lost, chasing a purpose that keeps moving away, just like K in the castle. You will suffer through systems that don't care about you, just like the prisoner in the penal colony. These experiences are not signs that something is wrong with you, they are signs that you are human. Kafka isn't trying to scare you, he's trying to prepare you. He's trying to show you what most people spend their whole lives trying to avoid, that suffering is not the enemy. Denial is, avoidance is. Pretending that everything is fine while your soul is collapsing is the real danger. Kafka teaches that the moment you face your suffering honestly, without disguises, without excuses, without shame, you begin to transform. Clarity comes before change. His stories show people trapped not because the world is cruel, but because they cannot confront their truth. Gregor couldn't say no. Joseph K. couldn't trust himself. K. couldn't stop chasing external approval. The hunger artist couldn't find nourishment in the world. Their suffering becomes their identity because they never step back and see it for what it is. This is the Kafka code: pain, clarity, transformation. Pain is the signal. Clarity is the awakening. Transformation is what happens when you stop lying to yourself about who you are and what you need. This is why Kafka's message is not hopeless, it's liberating. He strips away illusions so you can see who you really are beneath them. He shows that you don't need the world's permission to change, to grow, or to reclaim your identity. You don't need everyone to understand your purpose for it to matter. The hunger artist wasn't wrong because people stopped watching. Kay wasn't wrong because the castle shut him out. Gregor wasn't worthless because his family turned away. Their worth was not in the hands of others, and neither is yours. Kafka's final gift is this truth: you do not need the world to understand you in order to become yourself. Meaning does not come from approval. Identity does not come from acceptance. Purpose does not come from fitting in. You become yourself when you face your suffering honestly, when you stop running from who you are, and when you choose to build a life that reflects your inner truth.